start it.
Who are the Jazz's top candidates to take at picks 29 and 32? And did anyone excel in the scrimmages at the Combine today move their name into that conversation for the Jazz? And if so, who? We're here to tell you next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin. You guys know me by now. I'm joined by Richard Stayman, who we are recording from Chicago. I am a credentialed NBA draft analyst for Locked On NBA Big Board. Richard and I are both 2023 and 2024 attendees of the Combine. I am a Jazz broadcast assistant, statistician, and also lover of college basketball. So I've seen all these guys play well before just this week in the Combine. So I won't let it form all of my opinions, but I'll tell you who has moved their name into the conversation for the Jazz to be selected, for the Jazz to select. And I also just wanted to thank you guys for making Locked On Jazz your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is to comment anything below. Today's question is, who do you guys think improved their stock the most, and who would you like the Jazz to take at 29 and 32? Today's show is brought to you by Game Time, the best place for tickets to sports and concerts and much, much more. All right, on the show today, Richard and I will name our prime candidates for the Jazz to take at 29 and 32 and discuss why. There will likely be some debates there. In this second segment, Richard and I will react to today's scrimmages and see who has risen into contention to be drafted at 29 and 32, because I think there's a few guys that made a name for themselves. And in the final segment, we'll continue to talk about who has looked the best at the Combine, as well as discuss if the Jazz should use all three picks. All right, let's dive right in. Richard, without further ado, what is your preference for the Utah Jazz? Should they use their picks to take at 29 and 32? Are there guys hiding in plain sight?
I think there's probably some. I would use one of those picks to fill out the end of the bench, and then also one just to swing for the fences, because just naturally, I think somebody's going to eventually fall, and it's somebody who's going to have a high upside. I don't think it's someone like Tijon Salon by any means, but I do think it is going to be someone that we consider to be, one of the upside plays pretty early that we expected to be gone maybe by 25, that slips a few spots down to 29.
Yeah, I agree with that philosophy. Should the Jazz use both picks, one that's a little safer and one that's more of a boom or bust pick? I've said all along, and we'll probably talk about him in the next segment as well, because he played very well, that Baylor Scheiermann is a guy that I would strongly consider, but I'm starting to worry he's going to be gone by the time the Jazz draft 29 or 32. I think he's one of those safe guys who also has some upside. He shot the ball very well, and he performed well in the scrimmage drills along with the scrimmage today. Who are your top guys that you would look at and say, if they're there at 29 or 32, pull the trigger?
This one's going to be a hot take. If he is there, we don't know how far he's going to fall. There are two of them where I feel like the stock just feels very obviously down. The first one isn't as much of a hot take. I'll actually lead with him, and that's Kyle Filipowski. I'm not big on his game, but at 29, I think he's worth investing in. Could be eventually a 7-foot shooter, or really 6'11" shooter, 6'10". Measured really poorly. I don't remember how he did on the shooting. Do you, by any chance? Or
his wingspan was negative, and if you kind of compared that in a physical profile, it was of the ilk of Cody Zellers, Kelly Olynyk's, and a lot of guys that we would kind of consider lumbering athletes as opposed to fluid ones. So the question would be, does he play the 5? Does he play the 4? My concern about him, I've been low on him throughout the year, is I think his shot is adequate. I don't think he shot it very well. He actually made 11 of 25 from 3, and that was really low. But his shot looks better than the amount it goes in, and maybe that bodes well, maybe it doesn't. But I don't think he's a defensive 4, and I don't think he's a defensive 5 either. So I'm lower on him. But that said, if he's there, you might as well kind of have a known commodity rather than some of these guys who won't be there.
Yeah, the other one I would say also, I think Jacoby Walter's stock is falling. Now 29 feels like quite a bit of a stretch. You just never know in a draft like this. Somebody like him definitely could. He's 6'4", doesn't really – he was extremely inefficient. Doesn't have much of a dribble drive game, but could. Something that he had a little bit more in high school than in college. The defense was a little bit rough. I think he's probably gone by then, but if he is there at 29, that's the no hesitation. That was the one I was kind of leading in with the hot take, but I don't mean it to be a hot take. It truly is just something where I have a very strong suspicion that he's going to be falling in the draft.
Yeah, I don't think he's really on the table for the Jazz at 10. I could be mistaken. I only put him in as an in a previous episode about, hey, maybe this guy's on the board for the Jazz, but I don't believe that'll be a pick. I think he falls out of the lottery. 29, maybe a bit steep.
Easily.
So let's talk about a few guys that are commonly mocked to the Jazz at 29 and 32. Take me through your thoughts on Keyshawn George, who I think there's kind of a polarizing take on him because he shot the ball well, but his athletic testing was terrible.
Yeah, he turns 21 about 30 games into his rookie season this year. He also, like you said, he shoots the ball very well. Not much else, though. His defense is iffy because the athleticism is iffy. I have concerns. He's a decent gamble, and I don't mind swinging for him, especially if he's there at 29. I'm all the way for that. It's something where I wouldn't trade up for him, but I do think he is interesting because he's 6'7" and can shoot. And when you have that, anything else is that's the easiest foundation to get into the league.
Yeah, and he handles the ball well. He does not move well, but he handles the ball well, distributes fairly well. So maybe you get a jumbo-sized guard. I could see people comparing him to Kyle Anderson. I don't think they're one and the same, but that's kind of the mold of the type of mover he is. But his shot's very pretty. And maybe you're banking on one skill set in particular. So we're talking about wings. I've said on Locked On Jazz to everydayers that are listening many, many times, I think the Jazz are going to take a wing at 29 or 32, if not both. Are there any players that are not wings that you think, okay, like this guy is probably going to be in this range, and make a pitch for why the Jazz should take them? Because I think there's a couple players that have played their stock up.
What do you think of taking a center? Because you have watched the Jazz a lot more closely than me, but I'm curious. I feel like they need rim protection depth, not necessarily like a starting level guy, but somebody who can come in, play 15 minutes, protect the rim, and be a rim runner. What do you think of that?
I was going to say that Adem Bona has played his name into the conversation. Yeah, so I think he's one of the biggest risers from the combine. He jumped out of the gym, 40-inch max vert, blocked everything during drills, performed okay in the scrimmages. Numerically wasn't that impressive, but his effort's really good. Runs the floor very well. He's a little undersized in terms of height, but his arms are very long. I wouldn't mind that take. And I know you're high on this guy, Deron Holmes. Take me through why you would like Deron Holmes here for the Utah Jazz, because I'm a little lower on him, and then I'll give my pitch as well.
Yeah, so Deron Holmes' game is very interesting. When you look at him, Leif and I have had this debate very, very much off camera throughout the combine, throughout the last year at the combine. And the thing I always come back to is, one, he produces in every single situation. He finds a way to produce, whether it's posting up, pick and roll, just creating his own shot and going to the rim and bullying his way to the rim. Whatever it is, even cutting, handoffs, and just diving behind screens, whatever it is, he finds a way to get the ball in the basket. He rebounds and he makes his teammates better. While he may not have like any one great trait, I think he's extremely adaptive and will adapt to any role that he plays in the NBA. And also the jump shot seems to be progressing. He shot pretty well yesterday, but he needs more reps. That shot is new. I'll just say that. It has good touch, a lot of arc, but it clearly has been refined. So I think he is somebody that absolutely could fit. He's a win now player.
Yeah, and Jazz fans, maybe if you guys went out to March Madness, you would have seen the Dayton Flyers, and he was a second-team All-American, so that speaks to the production that Richard just alluded to. My concern with Holmes wasn't necessarily touch-related, though I do believe his shot moving more to the right side, he kind of had a hitch where he'd shoot it across his face and then bring the ball up. He looked smooth shooting it. It just was slow, but he made 18 to 25 threes, so I'll give him credit there. And then defensively, he blocked shots. So that sounds great in theory. My concern was I don't think he's a 5, and I don't think he moves well enough to be a 4. Like typically a 4 that isn't a great shooter, if they're big, has to be kind of a twitchy, end-to-end, rim-running type of guy who's an energy guy. As their defensive mechanism for staying in the NBA, he, to me, is slow-footed and doesn't change speeds well in terms of running the floor and or defensively change his foot position. He's more of a low man, a drop big who kind of influences the rim, but I don't think he has the athleticism to really do that in the NBA level. So we're going to continue these debates, and coming up next, we'll recap what we witnessed live in Chicago today, who excelled and who has played their way into contention to be selected at 29 and 32. But first, a word from BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the this episode is brought to you by BetterHelp, and sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. For example, I can tell you how I really and truly feel about the Jazz and who they should draft, but sometimes it's not all that. Sometimes it's more on their conscious and on their mind. You still need the same kind and unbiased audience all the same. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports teams and who it's important to draft. And it's important to get those things that are important to you off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Also, let me tell you guys about Intercap Lending. It's one of the largest independent lending companies. They're unbelievably responsive. Embrace change. They grow with the company. The company's grown as you guys have told them, hey, this is what we need. They adapt to that and really embrace that change. They have excellent borrow experience and plenty of testimonials to support that. And they're a direct issuer, and it feels like a small town thing because they're so friendly and operate so nicely, but it's actually in 44 states, not just in Utah. So that speaks to the incredible service that Intercap Lending has and has been executing at the highest level for years. And you can service your own loan. They start and continue long-term relationships. It's better for the consumer. And for us Locked On Jazz listeners, Steve Carter is our own personal loan officer for those of you who listen to Locked On Jazz. Call him at 385-800-8528. That's 385-800-8528. Make sure you tell him you're a Locked On Jazz listener and get the corporate discount. Intercap Lending, NMLS number 190465. For more information, visit intercaplending.com. Welcome back. I'm Leif Thulin, joined by Richard Stayman. But I got one more question for you guys. Are you guys watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So welcome back. We're here in Chicago, in case you guys are skipping through this episode, and we're recording from our hotel room, but we were at the Combine, and we watched scrimmages. There are 2 scrimmages, and there'll be 2 scrimmages tomorrow, which we'll also keep you in the loop about. And the Jazz have 3 picks, 2 of them in the first round, 1 an early second rounder. The top-end players didn't play, so they typically won't see the lottery picks, but what you could have seen is a future Jazz man being selected 29-32 based on who moved their stock up today. I alluded to Baylor Scheiermann. I know I've told you guys about him a couple times, but I'll make a pitch for him. And I made a prediction on Locked On NBA Big Board. I said it to you guys as well, that I think veteran players are the type of players who will thrive, and because they've played more basketball. And it's more rare to see one of these freshman guys in this context trying to show off. It just comes off as a little brash, maybe selfish. Well, Baylor Scheiermann shot the ball well, had 17 points, filled the rebounds. My pitch for him, even though he's older, even though he's not a great athlete, his agility, we were right there, literally 5 feet away from him. It didn't look super smooth, but what he did do is he shot the cover off the ball. Made 22 of 25 threes. He was really good off one dribble pull-ups. In the 4-on-4 shell drill, I thought he was the best player that participated, other than maybe Adem Bona. And what I foresee for a guy like him is someone who can play on your team in your playoff rotation, assuming you get there in a few years, but also immediately, and help your team grow with maturity, shot making, defensive ability to compete. He's not super swift of foot, but he is rugged. He guarded a lot of the best wings when Carrington played and funneled into Ryan Kalkbrenner. That's similar to how the Jazz operate with Walker Kessler operating behind. And I'd argue he's one of the top 3 or 4 shooters in the class. I have him in my top 15. I would really strongly contend if he's not taken, because I think he's going to move up to most people's boards about 20. If he's there, the Jazz should run to the podium and take him for shot making. I actually see him as kind of like a George Niang. Instead of playing a power forward, I think you're getting a big-bodied small forward that's not an excellent athlete, but will really shoot the ball well and be a kind of character guy on your team that will know his role and excel at it.
Yeah, I mean, he played really well. He grabbed a ton of rebounds. And also, like Leif alluded to, I mean, when you're 80% free throw shooter at over 6'6", you're a pretty dang good shooter. This year, he was at 87%. The year before, 84%. He's only shot below 80% once, and it was when he took it was 48 free throws as a freshman at South Dakota State. And just for reference, that was before even COVID. So, that was a long time ago. Obviously, he's a little bit older. I agree with Leif that in a class like this, you need veterans. But he also didn't look good. I think he is somebody that definitely could be an option. Another one who I think I've started seeing rise, and I know for a fact that teams really liked what he did today and that he's an analytical darling. That is Jonathan Mogbo of San Francisco. He's a very long 6'6", 6'7" some issues about separation and shooting, but I think teams will ultimately buy a lot of what he does because he's just so impactful. If you don't know, Bart Torvik is the site. They host a bunch of analytical numbers that even NBA teams do, in fact, use. It's simple stuff for them, but they factor a lot of that into how they compose their analytical models and things like that. Mogbo is one of the highest rated players, and we know this from the Jazz. They very much take into consideration analytics. Mogbo might be somebody worth monitoring. I think he looked good. He was just productive. I don't really have a ton of insight beyond that. I didn't think there was any one thing that he did well, but like it's just that ultimate ability to impact the game, even with no chemistry. Like these scrimmages are basically a test for feel for the game, and he passed.
Well, the interesting thing about him is, for those of you who don't watch much WCC basketball, he was among the best players with the ball in his hands, both in isolation and as a creator for others. And he was the guy that everyone keyed their defense in it against. And so he was able to read defenses, score for himself, and they ran their offense with him as the kind of the hub of the offense, as the big man. He'd hold it up top, and he'd kind of play the small ball 5, maybe a big 4 for San Francisco. Do you think he plays the 3 at the NBA level, or do you think he's a 4 that's kind of reliant on superb athleticism as opposed to height?
Yeah, he's not a 3. He took 2 threes in his 2 years at San Francisco. In D1, because his prior 2 years he was in JUCO. That is not a small forward, even though he is that height of around 6'7". 2 threes throughout the entire year, and then 69% from the free throw line. Just not buying the shot. I do not care that he did well. I feel like shooting the ball and that his shot actually looks pretty good. It just doesn't go in, and he doesn't take enough in that. Like you and I talked about this, you can take 2 shots a game and make 40%, like Cody Williams. Yeah. If you're not shooting those 4 times and you're only taking the dare shots where the defenses are like, please go ahead and take it, like that's not the same quality. So I think he has to be a 4 because of that general what he is. And even then, he's not really much of a perimeter creator, even though he kind of tries to be. I just think that's a little bit far away, and it just has to be that combination has to come along before he can really get there.
Yeah, I agree with that. The one thing I would push back on is, or I guess I'll agree with something, then I'll push back. The agree would be that I truly value the best shooters, those who shoot the most. So I think Peyton Samford, the sharpshooter from Iowa, if you're going for a shooter and then that's your pitch, maybe you go for him or Scheiermann, who shot even more than guys like Reed Shepherd and Dalton Connect. Obviously, Connect had enormous volume. Shepherd, a great shooter, not as much volume because he shared roles. So a guy like Mogbo, even if he were to shoot more than just 2, but it was still a low number and he shot well in drills, doesn't mean too much. What matters in drills is a guy like Stephon Castle, who we'll talk about on Locked on Jazz tomorrow, so make sure to tune in for that, is when he has questions about his shot and he emerges with a little bit better form and consistency shooting the ball. So now what I'd push back on is the Jazz want someone who could swing, and that would be a swing. But I think at 29-32, we talk about at the top of the draft, you're taking pieces. I think you might try to just get a veteran guy who you know what you're getting. But there's one guy I want to discuss here, and that's Carlton Carrington, often goes by Bub. He shot the lights out. He was probably the biggest riser in terms of just shooting performance, and he was unbelievable off the dribble, shot the well from 3. His star drill numbers were unbelievable. He's projected on, just to give you a rough estimate, on Tankathon as someone who's available and actually projected to go to the Jazz at 29. He's 6'5", 195, according to Tankathon, a little bit smaller, and that's about a 6'8" wingspan. He shot 79 from the free throw line, so that's a good indication. 32 from 3, and everyone was like, oh, he can't really shoot that well. But you saw he could really shoot, one of the purest strokes. But if you're taking him at 29, you get a ball handler out that probably plays off the bench. I could really go for a young player to cultivate as opposed to kind of those veterans that we know what we're getting. Is there any credence to that?
I agree with you. I would push back. I don't think he's there at 29. I think it's extremely unlikely. Just for reference, before the combine, if you don't know this site, rookiescale.com, John Chepkovich, he works with Draft Express. He has a site called Rookie Scale where he does a consensus big board that updates pretty often. Before the combine, Carrington was 24. Objectively, I think Bub Carrington is probably the biggest riser at the moment. he's got a chance to be in the lottery. He's also one of the youngest players in the draft, and he's shot extremely well. And the shot is pretty much the big question mark for him with like, not if it is there, it's just how good it is. I'd be shocked if he's even available at 20 at this point.
Yeah, I think he's one of those guys who might play his way out of contention. The one more player that I kind of want to discuss, we talked about Keyshawn George as someone who could shoot it, but athletically didn't test very well. There's a few other players that I thought shot the ball well, but athletically didn't look great. That would be Bobby Clintman. He was at Wake Forest, if that name sounds familiar. He played internationally this past year. He's 6'10", and his stroke looked very pure. And then the other player I would say maybe Jazz fans should familiarize themselves with would be Peyton Sanford, who shot very poorly. And I want to talk about that because I think he may be the best or second best shooter in this class. Stroke is pure, difficulty of shots right there, unlimited confidence, great range, and a solid athlete, big, tested in as taller than you may expect. He played at Iowa this year and played his role. You know exactly what he'd be. Is there anything to say, well, it's just a bad shooting day, or were there things that concerned you while watching the scrimmage today?
Yeah, the people I talked to were pretty unimpressed. He airballed 2 threes. Yesterday was a really poor performance. I think he really hurt his stock. Now, long-term, is he still a great shooting prospect? Absolutely. That doesn't change how I view him on my board. It's going to impact how teams and scouts view him for this year. And ultimately, if he does stay in this draft, which all indications seem to be yes, it's just a speed bump. Like, he could still shoot really well at team workouts. At the end of the day, I think a team like, say, Minnesota, they're picking 27 in the late 30s as well. I forget the exact number. It might be 37. If Peyton Sanford shoots, say they have 2 workouts there. The first time he does very well. They bring him in and go, well, okay, we want to see you again because you had a bad workout. He does really well. That might weigh more to them than – and the same thing for Utah. Utah has 29 and 32, so exact same thing. Where if they bring him in, and I think that could be something where it's like, okay, the combine was just clearly part of an off week. I think any shooters shouldn't go cold like this, especially at the pro level, but shooters do go cold. Like, if you watch an NBA season, you know that there's 5-game stretches, 7-game stretches where shooters shoot like 20%. It's not that uncommon outside of the historically great ones. So I think it's a speed bump more than a big red flag. Like, I'm not taking this over a season's worth of content, but I really do think that the Jazz should consider him. They could probably trade down at this point, though, to get him.
Yeah, I think the last player that I believe may be a real person the Jazz could take, but might also be going back to school, will be Johnny Furphy. I like him. Richard's not a huge fan, but the reason that this is important to discuss is how much do you weigh the combine versus the season, and how much does someone who shoots the lights out after not playing great, or someone who does very well in agility after being deemed a poor defender like Dalton Connect, how much does that actually rise their stock? Well, we'll discuss that in the coming up episodes. But coming up next in this episode, we're going to discuss the merits of keeping each pick. The Jazz would have 3 picks. Is there a reason to do that? And also, we're going to give you some more combine reactions that would incentivize the Jazz to keep the second and third pick. But first, let me tell you about Game Time. Have you ever been to a playoff game? Because I have, and they are awesome. And it's never been a better time to go now because of Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. That is incredible because typically if you wait, you kind of are hosed. Not with Game Time. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. They have great last-minute deals, last-minute ticket deals, flash deals, zone deals, everything you could ever dream for. Easy to find and buy MLB tickets too, and for every kind of event in your area. And then also, you can see exactly where you're sitting. And for those of you who love sports like I do, like Richard does, it really matters your view, because sometimes you look at it and you're like, man, that's not as the view that it seemed to be. Well, when I was perusing White Sox tickets while we're here at the Combine, I got a panoramic view from my seat in the app before you can buy it. And I can tell you it's worth it to truly know where you're going to be sitting. And Game Time has a cool feature that also it tells you the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And again, create that same account. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today and get your last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back. It's combine reaction time and also discussion about should the Jazz keep those picks. I'll just ask it just simply to you. The Jazz have 3 picks. They had 3 picks last year. That's 6 contracts that would be guaranteed. And the Jazz are young. I get that. There's a reason for it. But do you think the Jazz would keep all their picks? Because in a draft that's considered weak, is it worthwhile, or should you attack in free agency and try to get some players?
Well, I think a lot of times, and not every time, but a lot of times when teams have these picks very close to each other, and there are multiple teams like this year. The Knicks, for example, have back-to-back picks. I think a lot of them, they'll either package them both up and consolidate 2 for 1 to a team like Philly, for example. They're not going to do it, but let's just use them as an example. They have 2 guaranteed roster spots next year. If a team like that maybe is struggling, like Washington or something, they need more picks, they might do it. The problem is it's also a seller's market, not a buyer's market. And to me, that makes it tough. Utah might have to. The biggest workaround around it is, what if you just take a draft and stash guy? I mean, I think if you got Pacome Didia at 29, that is not only an incredible steal, but you also dodge the whole you have a roster spot. You don't have to use it right away. He's currently, I've seen him anywhere from the 40s all the way into the 20s. I err very much on the side of the 20s. I think he is a high-level shooter. He's 6'6". He's young. He's playing in Europe, maybe 6'7". I think he just gets it. I'm a big fan of his. He would be the ideal draft and stash to kind of work around those roster spots.
Well, that's a clever idea. I hadn't thought about that. In tomorrow's episode for Locked On Jazz listeners, you'll hear me talking about the merits of drafting extra players and it being indicative of where the franchise is going. Because if the Jazz are going to contend next year, I think they probably don't take 3 picks. I think maybe 2, maybe even just 1. Maybe you bundle those 29 and 32 with 10 and move up in the draft. Maybe you bundle 29 and 32, move up slightly, and still pick at 10th, depending who comes there. I think it really depends on if the Jazz get the guy that they really want at the top end of the draft, or maybe they're aggressive trade up, which is a discussion we'll talk about tomorrow on Locked On Jazz. I think it really tells you where the Jazz will be heading, because last year and the year before that, the Jazz came in with a not 2 foot in, just a 1 foot in, 1 foot out approach. And it clearly hindered the Jazz because they got 10th. And now you could say, well, the Hawks were supposed to be 13th, but that was an anomaly. You typically want to give yourself the best chance to get the highest pick. This year doesn't matter as much, but if you can get a guy that the Jazz really believe in, whether it's being aggressive trading up, I think you'll see that move have ramifications to if the Jazz draft at 29 and 32, and also if the Jazz decide, hey, there's someone in the trade market at 20 that we like, or the free agency market. I think that there's a chance that the Jazz don't use those picks because they want roster spots of guaranteed players. Now, if the Jazz decide, you know what, next year we're just going to develop, I think there's a chance that you see all these picks play and some of them play in the G League, and you kind of have this element of competition between the youngsters. Keontae George, now maybe he's got a point guard like Bub Carrington to compete with. Maybe Taylor Hendricks battles with a wing that's a veteran and has differing skill sets. Maybe you see Walker Kessler and Bryce Sensabaugh have competition internally if there's a Adem Bona or a separate shooter that we've talked about. So that's kind of where I am with it. And I think taking a draft and stash is a clever idea. There's not too many options, but Dadier would definitely be one that I would consider.
Yeah, I don't think you can go wrong. Also, he's still 18 and will be until after summer league.
Yeah, he's someone that I would monitor closely if you guys are looking for a new name. He's not at the combine, so we can't give you too much. Well, tomorrow we're going to tell you guys about who the Jazz might want to trade up for, who's had the displays at the top end of the draft at the combine and in workouts, what the buzz is around the combine, and will the Jazz take those 2 picks? Well, that's all tomorrow, so make sure to tune into that. But I also want you guys to wanted to thank you guys for making Locked On Jazz your first listen. With your next one, if you still want to hear Richard Stayman and I, Locked On NBA Big Board has more and more NBA prospect top reacting to the combine, the scrimmages, workouts, and all. So tune into that. And also, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On. Plus, our national shows covering every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thanks for listening, and as always, go Jazz.